Record. Cool. Welcome everybody to Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Talk and Reviews. I'm your host, Vincent Hannum.
And I am Matt Levine.
And tonight we will be talking about a 2010 independent horror monster film called Rubber, which is about a killer tire that runs amok in the desert, blowing people's heads off. Oop, spoiler alerts will be in this episode. So first and foremost, just thank you everybody for your support, for listening, and for engaging and connecting with us on Instagram, on YouTube, on TikTok. It's really great to just know that somebody's listening and watching. So truly, thank you.
There's somebody out there.
I know, in the void, in the abyss.
Yeah. It's good. It's good to know.
How are you, Matt?
I'm doing pretty well. It's a good, hot week here in the Twin Cities. Watching some good movies, excited about some stuff coming out, have some good artistic projects going on. So can't complain. Yeah.
You know what I did today?
What's that?
I Googled you and your new novel coming out.
Oh, geez. Thank you. I'm honored.
And I had to read the synopsis for myself because when I asked you about it, you were very vague.
It's something that I've been working on, trying to get my pitch down a little bit better. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Hollow comes out next week, next Tuesday, June 21st. I'm very excited about it. It's sort of even a monster book. So there's a tie in there.
But there's like a cult aspect. Is that right?
I would say it's kind of a satanic cult, but it's also, people in a small town in northern Wisconsin, a very eerie environment, who are sort of thrown into desperate circumstances and do the best that they can, essentially.
And there's a detective in it.
Yes, he's not exactly a detective. He's a patrol officer in Milwaukee with a tarnished reputation. He is sent on, well, he's not sent up north, but he's placed on mandatory suspension. He goes up north and he sort of stumbles into this strange, hellish world where all of his inner demons come out.
Yep, I'm sold. Honestly, not just selling your book on our show, but that's right
Awesome.
up my alley.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Thanks again for bringing it up. I'm very excited about it. But what do you have going on, Vincent? How are you doing?
I'm good. Since we're speaking about our own projects, my Frankenstein play is being cast probably as we speak. They just held auditions for it in the suburbs of Chicago. So you'll all be hearing more about that in the coming months, but it plays in October. So yeah, that's been a nice project to have going on. I'm sure you can relate.
Yeah, that's awesome. Especially after COVID. I know we are still in COVID, but sort of when things are opening up again, to have artistic projects and audiences and things going on. It's a very good feeling. So that's awesome. I can't wait to hear more about the play.
Yeah, likewise. We're writers, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're doing it. Yeah.
We have credentials to dissect and analyze monster movies.
We would like to believe so, yes.
Right. We're very humble here on Camp Kaiju. Next month, speaking of, I don't want to give anything away yet to people listening or watching, but stick around to the end of this episode to hear about what we have coming up in July. We are dubbing it Kaiju-July. And got some fun things in the hopper there. Also coming up this month, in addition to more killer car movies, we will be featuring a special bonus feature-length episode about the new Jurassic World movie that has just come out. I've been kind of looking at reviews and just kind of trying to see what the word on the street is. My expectations are low, to say the least, but maybe in the best way possible.
Yeah,
we'll see.
I agree with that. I'm excited to talk about it. I think we've had a string of really good movies on here recently, which is great. Of course, I love talking about good movies, but to talk about a bad movie would be kind of a nice change of pace,
Yeah, and a new movie.
Yeah.
I'm See excited, if it stands the test of time.
Yeah, we'll have to do some prognostication on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, everyone out there, stay tuned for some really exciting stuff coming up. And what do you know? Rubber is our 50th episode on Camp Kaiju. So a lot to celebrate here. Thanks for sticking with us. So before we get into the plot synopsis, Matt, what is your personal history with Rubber?
I was aware of this movie before we watched it for this episode. I had never seen it before. But even when it came out about 12 years ago, I was familiar with it to a certain extent. Like, it played at film festivals that has a very bizarre, sort of absurd concept, which we'll obviously get into. But I had never seen it before. I kind of just heard that it was sort of like kind of a gimmick movie, but it really, according to some people that I really trust, a very good one. So I've always been intrigued to see it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It came out in 2010. I was in college, freshman in college, and I was immediately taken by the concept of a killer tire. So all these years later, I finally had a perfect excuse to watch it. And I'll just say it wasn't exactly what I expected, but I think that that's a great, I think that's great for the purposes of conversation. And there's a lot, I think, to talk about good and bad with this film.
Yeah, totally agree. It goes in unexpected directions. Yeah. I don't want to, yeah, no spoilers at this point, so we'll get more into that. But this the director, Quentin Dupieux, and I really hope I'm pronouncing that right.
I think so. It's as close as we're gonna get.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, for any French listeners out there, that is not my forte, but hey, French word.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. But no, I've always wanted to see more of Quentin Dupieux's movies. He has a lot of very absurd, sort of semi-surreal ideas. I know his most recent movie from 2020, Mandibles, is kind of about a giant fly. So that's familiar territory to things that we've talked about on Camp Kaiju before.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I even though I haven't seen any of his movies aside from Rubber, it definitely seems like absurdism is like the name of the game for him, which I fully admire.
Yes. Yeah, we'll get into it. Let's get to the synopsis right quick. And yeah, then we'll talk about the French love affinity, the French's affinity with absurdism.
Awesome.
Okay, so the film starts with a sheriff named Chad, and he begins the movie with just a monologue to the camera, pointing out that there are many moments in cinema that happen for, quote, no reason, and that life is full of this no reason, and that this film is an homage to no reason. Chad is sometimes participating in the narrative action and sometimes commenting on it throughout the film. And in the beginning, a group of people then gather in a California desert to watch a quote unquote film. And there's an accountant character who shows up on a bicycle. He passes out binoculars to the audience, these people who have gathered, and then he rides off. And then the audience now starts to look through their binoculars into the distance, waiting for their film to start. And then throughout the film, this group of people return in order to gauge their reactions to what has taken place so far.
So the film that they're watching, essentially, somewhere in the desert, these spectators see a tire named Robert suddenly come to life. After standing upright, Robert the tire discovers he has psychokinesis and tests his newfound powers by making animals and inanimate objects explode. There's this great segment where he sort of like finds his legs a little bit like a newborn animal or something, and then he's testing out his powers in like a beer bottle, a plastic bottle, just a bush, and then some unfortunate animals that get in his way. So after he kind of figures out how to move on his own, he spots a woman drive by and attempts to use his powers on her, but he only succeeds in making her car stall before he is run over by a truck. The woman manages to start her car and drive off, while Robert kills the truck driver that ran him over, the first human exploding head in the movie.
Yes. Robert then locates the woman at a nearby motel and enters the room next to hers. He kills the motel maid, after she finds him and throws him out of the room. He, just everyone out there, is the pronoun used by the other characters in the film to refer to this tire. So anyways, Sheriff Chad then arrives at the scene to investigate the string of murders. Meanwhile, the in-film audience, having starved for 2 days, are given a turkey by the accountant, but then they begin to suffer intense abdominal pain. And then, so now we're back to the motel. Chad is questioning the motel owner, and then Chad suddenly stops upon hearing an alarm go off, indicating that the audience have started to succumb to the poison-laced turkey. So if you're following along, Chad is in on the poisoning of the audience. Chad then urges the other characters to go home, telling them that the film is over, as the audience is dead now. But the accountant informs him that the audience member who uses a wheelchair, there's one who did not eat the turkey, and he's still alive. So now Chad, he's a little embarrassed, and so he has no other choice but to resume his investigation, and witnesses then Robert the tire kill the motel owner. And then Chad leads his squad of cops on a tire hunt. And then the accountant himself attempts to poison the wheelchair using audience member, but he becomes hungry and eats the poisoned food and dies.
So then Robert, comes across a group of people burning a large pile of tires, resulting in him going on a killing spree for 3 days. Chad lures the tire into a trap using dynamite on a mannequin dressed as the woman, who I believe is only known as female motorist, at least according to the credits. We never learn her name.
Mm-hmm.
Robert blows up the mannequin's head, but the dynamite fails to detonate. The man who uses a wheelchair mocks the sheriff for the botched trap, enraging Chad enough to destroy Robert with a shotgun off screen and tossing the tire's carcass at the man, who continues to criticize him for the anticlimax. Robert is then reincarnated as a tricycle and kills the man in the wheelchair before recruiting an army of tricycles on his way to Hollywood. The end.
The end. If that was a little hard to follow at times, that's the point. So yeah, thanks everybody. The film stars a few main actors. It's a large ensemble cast, but a few main actors. Steven Spinella as the Sheriff Chad, Roxanne Mesquita as the woman in the car, Wings Hauser as man in wheelchair, and Jack Plotnick as the accountant. And then the film was not only directed by Quentin Dupieux, but it was co-written, edited, cinematography by, and co-composed by Quentin Dupieux. Yeah, so
Jack of all trades.
Jack of all trades, one-man band. Honestly, I mean, not bad at what he does. I mean, I think he knew what he was doing. What do you think?
Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, there are things that I didn't like about it, and obviously we'll get into more of that later, but extremely proficient, like definitely on a limited budget. He's able to shoot very well. The editing is very kind of perfectly kind of composed to like build up this sense of like bizarreness and the sense of like absurdity, you know. The music is a little bit like too drony for my tastes, but it's very effective for like what the movie's trying to do. So yeah, it's all really well done.
Do you know that Quentin Dupieux is also an electronic musician?
Indeed. And I believe he is actually Mr. Oizo, who is credited in this film. So that's actually his credit. Yeah.
Right. So he has a whole other career as an electronic French musician. So that's cool.
Yeah, indeed. I'm kind of excited to check out more of his stuff. Yeah. And, you know, I just wanted to add that Steven Spinella, I did not recognize him, but he's had a career for quite a while. He's been in movies like Virtuosity, Ravenous, Bubble Boy, which is not a very good movie, but, you know, it is well known. So he's been around for a while. And I just think it's kind of cool that he shows up in this very strange movie, which seems to be like kind of an anomaly in his career, you know?
Yeah, he definitely had one of those faces that I was like, he looks vaguely familiar. It must be Bubble Boy I was thinking of.
Yeah. A movie which is equally nonsensical as this one, perhaps.
Yeah. So clearly Quentin Dupieux has a bit of a reputation for surreal comedic films. After Rubber, which sort of is his first main hit outside of France, the producer of the film agreed to produce the film if Quentin were to film it in the United States and in English. So that obviously, I mean, it did, for better or for worse, it did help the what's the word I'm looking for? The exposure of the film.
Yeah, the appeal, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least to American audiences, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Much wider release because of that. So yeah. The film was shot in 14 days on a budget of $100,000, which I just love that because our previous film, Duel, was also shot on a similar time frame and budget.
Yeah. Proof that you don't need all the resources in the world to craft like an exciting, weird, unique movie, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also fun to compare and contrast the advances in technology and like filmmaking tech from 1971, 72.
For Duel? 71, I believe.
Yes, I think that's right.
That. Yeah.
We just talked about it.
Yeah. I feel like, 1971.
Yeah. And then 40 years later, you have Rubber. And I mean, the camera, the cinematography is so starkly different. I mean, I'm sure Dupieux was using a digital camera. It looks very digital to me.
Yeah, he was using, I wish I remembered, I think it was like a Canon SLR, which is actually like a still camera, but you can take video with it as well. And my personal tastes have me, like, I always prefer sort of like the 16 millimeter grainy sort of like tactile feel. So like that's one way that I think Duel kind of has a leg up over Rubber. They're very different movies, obviously, so it's probably kind of unfair to compare them. But yeah, you're totally right. I mean, like, film technique and film form has just changed so much, and the fact that you can kind of buy a camera for, I would say maybe like a couple $100. The camera that he used probably is not more than like 700 or 800, and shoot this movie with it is it's pretty cool. It's pretty inspiring for aspiring filmmakers out there.
When I was in high school, my group of friends and I, like, we would shoot our movies. Like, we would shoot movies on the weekends over the summers. And this was like right before the smartphone era.
Yeah.
So like we like pool our money and we'd buy all this equipment and get like a $400 little handheld camera, digital, with a flip screen, with a screen that could rotate. Very high tech. But these days, only like 15 years later, less than, my friends and I are like, can you imagine the movies we would have made if we had our iPhones then?
Yeah.
With the quality of camera and the ease, like you could just edit a movie on your phone.
Yeah, I mean, you think of like Tangerine or Unsane. Those are like the two movies that come to my mind right away for movies that were shot on an iPhone and look really good. Like, they, in their own way, they have a distinct aesthetic,
Yeah.
But yeah, my friends and I did the same thing. Like, we borrowed our parents' camcorders, and it looks terrible when we rewatch them now. In a way, I'm kind of happy that we had to like go through the labor of love of like trying to learn the technology and like edit on a VCR. Like, we didn't even like use a computer to edit back then. So that was in the olden days. Yeah.
That's impressive, because I was gonna say, you remember the pain in the butt of like working with like whatever what's the Apple movie Pro or something?
Yeah. Is it just iMovie, or that's the one that it is now? Maybe it was a different one back then.
Yeah. And then, but anyways, you're working on a VCR. That's insane.
That was that kind of dates me a little bit, but that was in the 90s that we were doing that.
I wouldn't even know where to begin with that.
Those were the days, man.
You're an Artur over here.
Well, I pretend like I am.
So yeah, anyways, Depew shot this thing very efficiently considering his limitations. I was reading some interviews with him. He based the at least the intro to Rubber on the intro of Wall-E, just in the sense of following this inanimate object come to life. I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, especially because in this case, the sort of like pseudo Wally creature is like blowing up animals and humans. Like just
Yeah.
that contradiction is pretty great, I think.
Right. If Wall-E was a psychokinetic killer.
Yeah.
With that said, though, this was from a Wall Street Journal interview at the time. Depew, he admitted he grew bored. So when he first started writing the screenplay, he said he grew bored of just telling the story of a killer tire. I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, I don't want to just make Jaws with a tire. So he grew bored of it. And that's then what resulted in the addition of the audience stand-in in the film and this sort of meta aspect to it. It seems to me he was just trying to shake things up for himself as a creative artist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, and again, we'll get more into this, but like that's where this movie really kind of comes to life a little bit, I think like that meta aspect and like the sort of like, yeah, the sort of it's like dual narrative side by side a little bit. We have the story of like the film within a film audience, and then like this ridiculous story of the tire. That's what totally makes the movie. If it was just a movie about a killer tire, it would probably be kind of fun, but like sort of forgettable. So I feel like his like creative boredom, like, yeah, like gave rise to like something way better than it might have been in the first place.
I knew talking about Rubber with you would be a great conversation because I don't feel that way.
Okay. That's fair. I totally understand that. Yeah. And I'm not saying it totally works, but I think if it was just a tire rolling around, like blowing up heads and animals and stuff, like, it's kind of a one joke premise. So and not that that's a bad thing, but I think like adding the meta aspect kind of, deepens that just a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. I actually do agree with that. And that's still a complaint I have about the film.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Okay.
Yeah.
What's some more fun background stuff? The film was shown at the Cannes Film Festival in 2010 to really positive reviews. However, maybe speaking to sort of the stark divide that this movie actually does elicit from a lot of people, the film was also shown at a Toronto Film Festival called After Dark Film, and Fangoria magazine was there and noted that the film, quote, deeply split the audience, and the reactions ranged from huge laughs and applause, but also included the only boos heard by Fangoria at the festival. So if you Google Rubber, the reactions are across the board, whether it's like private blogs or Rotten Tomatoes, Letterboxd, whatever. It seems like you either love it or you hate it.
I love that. That's the movie in a nutshell. Yeah, I tend to give a lot of leeway to movies that like are very divisive to people, because it
Yeah,
usually means that you're trying to do something sort of interesting or like original.
totally true. And I'm glad, because I don't usually watch such polarizing films, but I'm glad that I did.
Yeah.
Before we get into themes, I just want to talk to you about banditsemporium.com, the official t-shirt partner of Camp Kaiju. I'm rocking their Frankenstein t-shirt right now. You can visit banditsemporium.com and get 10% off your next purchase by using promo code Camp Kaiju, all one word. And you get a cool Godzilla t-shirt. You can get the t-shirt with our logo on it. You get a vampire t-shirt and a Frankenstein t-shirt. Long sleeves also available. However, if you live anywhere like Minneapolis, where it's going to be 100 degrees next week, you're going to want the short sleeve shirt. So check them out, send them some love, and support them and this podcast at the same time. Thanks, everybody. Themes. I think this is the meat and potatoes of discussing Rubber. I feel like this movie is very theme centric, maybe in its lack of theme, if you will.
Yeah.
We're gonna put on our literary hats here and talk about absurdism, nihilism, lots of isms, and I don't know. I want to throw it to you, Matt, and see if you what pearls of wisdom can you throw at us about some of these ideologies.
I don't know if they're pearls of wisdom necessarily, but I would like, to me, the ism that came up the most is Dadaism, which is like very closely related to surrealism, but also very different at the same time. I would say if surrealism is kind of getting into like dreams and like the id and the sort of, the space inside of your mind, the kind of like inner world of our minds. Then Dada really is about nothing, and like proudly so. It's kind of saying that art can be purely formalist, very absurd, and that in itself is kind of political because it shuns story and theme, and like it doesn't pretend to have any kind of like deep message or importance. Like it's not looking for Oscar nominations or anything like that, and that in itself is like totally non-mainstream.
Yeah.
That's what the Dadaists would say. And like this kind of came about in like the, maybe not the Oscar part, but the art form kind of came about in the 1920s with artists like Marcel Duchamp and Man Ray. There's a great silent movie, Entr'acte, by Rene Clair, another French movie, which kind of really does seem like a bunch of unrelated images that are just really ridiculous, make no sense at all. And I've always kind of had a fondness for this kind of art where it's like we don't really need to have a story or a theme or even a purpose for existing. And that's kind of like what makes it important, It's also what makes it ultimately maybe a little bit hollow. But, I think, and again, that's kind of the point of it in a way,
Yeah. And this film certainly seeks to deconstruct the art of filmmaking. That, like you said, it doesn't have to mean something to be worthwhile.
Mhm.
I think that's what Depew is saying. I don't know. What do you
Yeah.
this I need, so as a theater major, I was exposed to theater of the absurd and Dadaism in the theatrical, in theater history. It's there are a lot of things, definitions that they seem very close to each other. So it's just slightly difficult for me to really read into the nuance of each one. I buy the Dadaism with this film. I buy the theater of the absurd more than nihilism. There was a critique from collider.com that really highlighted the nihilistic themes. But see, like nihilism and absurdism both speak to like this sort of like, what's the point of life? That there is no point, there's no standard form or morals. But I think absurdism goes a little bit more into the sorry, I'm just reading my notes. Like the centers on the individual themselves and their place in the universe, and that fundamentally nothing makes sense. I don't know. It's easier for me to talk about examples like Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, or books by Albert Camus, a Frenchman. That in high school I read The Stranger by Camus, and I hated it. But because it's like a sequence of events just happened and you had a solid plot halfway through the film, and then the plot completely turned upside down, and I was like, I don't know what I'm reading anymore. Flash forward to a 31-year-old Vincent. I get it now, and I actually really do like theater of the absurd, because maybe just because I've lived a bit of life now and I understand that life is ultimately a random thing.
Right. Yeah. Which definitely does sound nihilistic, but I think like, like theater of the absurd and Dada, like I feel like the underlying point is that the art itself is like the maybe not the meaning of life, which sounds very over the top, but like the reason to be alive, like to make art, and to me that doesn't seem nihilistic. That actually seems kind of hopeful, like you can
Yeah.
make something that is really ridiculous and seemingly doesn't have a meaning or a purpose at all. Like Lieutenant Chad or whatever Sheriff Chad says in the beginning of Rubber, like no reason, like none of it has any reason. Like I feel like movies like this actually embrace that kind of, which to me seems more hopeful than nihilistic.
Yes, which is I feel like I'm not an expert on nihilism at all. I have not done my homework on that philosophy, but my connotation,
Mhm.
I don't know if it's wrong or not, is that it's a very pessimistic outlook, but I don't feel that connotation with absurdism.
Yeah, totally agree. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and I read that Collider article as well, and I really like it a lot. The writer is Rosalind Quell, and I really like this. Is it okay if I read a couple
Yeah,
sentences
yeah.
from her review? She writes, "Reason has no place in cinematography, much like life itself. Rather, every flick or show is just the imagination and muse of one particular person. Thus, film shouldn't need a reason to exist. Film just is. We need more work without reason, devoid of rationality. In this way, viewers will be able to simply experience and enjoy the ludicrousness of nothingness." Which I feel like that's a pretty good encapsulation of this movie. And it is pretty enjoyable, even though it's very like, it can be repetitive and maybe wears out its welcome a little bit, but it is kind of like still a thrill for the most part.
Yes, I did. That's what like I did enjoy so much of this film, but there were moments that really wore thin with me
Yeah.
in terms of sort of the one trick aspect. And I guess Depew was just limited by his budget, but I would have loved to have seen the tire kill in more ways than just blowing up heads.
Yeah.
I would
Me
have
too.
loved the just one guy talking here. I would have loved the tire to for the violence to escalate gradually. And like by
Mhm.
the end, the tire's just blowing up a whole city. It's a true rage monster, which does happen off screen,
Yeah.
which was really a bit of a letdown.
Totally agree. And that would have been quite a movie to see all that happen like in real time.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like what the movie is leading towards at the end when we see this like army of tricycles like go to Hollywood. We see the Hollywood sign in the
Yeah.
background. Which that in itself is like reason enough to make this movie in America in English. Like that kind of makes it worth it right there, I think, that ending.
Yeah.
And like the movie that plays in your head that you imagine of like these murderous tricycles like overtaking Hollywood. That's a
Yeah.
cool, fun idea. I would love to see that. But of course, like Depew and the filmmakers did not have the budget to make that happen, like you said.
I know. And that's it. I feel like this movie was such a tease for me. Like
Yeah.
exactly. And like taking on Hollywood just encapsulates the whole thing. I wanted to mention that Collider article again because I'm really glad we read the same thing.
Mhm.
I liked a lot of what she was saying. I would just a lot of things weren't jibing with me. She talked about she mentioned Dali and how his paintings like seemingly make no sense. Uh, and I think this is just a great open-ended question about art. Even if you're making quote unquote meaningless art, the fact that you have an audience will inherently give it meaning. They will read into it whatever they want. So like
Yeah.
Dali, the persistence of memory with the melting clocks, I think
Yeah.
that's full of meaning and symbolism. And you know what I mean? It's not just nothing.
Yeah. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And that, yeah, I would. This to me is like the difference between surrealism and Dadaism, where Dali actually was a surrealist, and I feel like this movie is more Dadaist. Like
Mm,
I, yeah, I mean, I like her review a lot, but I actually don't really agree with that comparison because you're totally right that Dali and surrealism in general is like loaded with metaphor and symbolism, and you can read so much into it. But Rubber, I think, like with the kind of like meta story of like the film within the film audience, like watching this like all play out, and like,
Mhm.
you know, they all die off, and then the story is like kind of forced to continue when they realize that one audience member is still alive.
Yeah.
Like all of that is kind of just emphasizing like, you know, like it's, I'm glad that you brought up the role of the audience, because this movie is sort of like underlying the absurdity of even the audience's response, you know? And
Yeah.
like I have a feeling that like if Depew was like listening to this right now, he would just be like cackling maniacally that we're like pontificating about this movie. You know, like I feel like the entire point of it really is that there's like no point to it, you know? So it does feel a
Uh,
little bit maybe like cruel, I guess, but I sort of admire that still.
yeah, it's like I respect it and I admire it. It's still at times a hard pill to swallow for someone who is, I mean, for most people, we are given the uh, the Aristotle
Mhm.
structure. We have three acts. This happens at this moment. You have your prototypical characters, your archetypes, and stories are neatly packaged. So then when you have something that completely messes with your expectations, it can be hard to get on board with.
Yeah, I definitely do agree. Even though, yeah, this movie can only go so far. Like, I definitely admire its kind of like, um, it's like pranksterishness. I don't know if that's a word.
Yeah.
You know, like I admire that, but it's not like you're ever emotionally affected by this movie, and it doesn't like have these sort of great political themes or anything like that. So I agree
Right.
with you, and I don't think that something like this can ever be like a great comment on the state of humanity or anything like that. But it can be like a fun little stunt, you know. I think like that's
Yeah.
kind of like what it is at its best.
Yeah. And I do like the audience being included as a reflection of us and begging the question, what is the relationship between audience and art? Can one exist without the other? That's a question that in the theater we talk about all the time. Like,
Mm.
can you do a play without an audience? Most people I talk to say no, you need theater is theater because there is at least one person watching, and that's the whole point of storytelling.
Yeah, you know, I do think that's true of any art form. I definitely think that like a work of art comes alive when people interact with it and experience it and talk about it and stuff like that. So you know, like, yeah, it's kind of this movie does seem to be implying. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know if the movie really has anything to say about that. It's sort of just saying like, isn't this a ridiculous scenario where like, because you know, like you actually in the in your notes. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, but
I rambled.
um, you know, in your notes to this movie, and I read this too. Depew was actually inspired by an event where he snuck into a movie theater that was playing one of his own movies called Steak, and there was nobody in the theater. Like it was just playing to an empty room, basically.
Yeah.
So you know, like I think that event led him to make Rubber as a way of saying, like, isn't this a ridiculous exchange where like artists make art for people who might never experience it, you know?
Yeah. Oh man, as an artist, it's like, as myself, as an artist myself, it's like, you create things, you put them out there. You assume people read it or watch it or listen to it, but you don't know ultimately. It's just kind of like a leap of faith almost.
Yeah, it kind of is vulnerable, you know?
Yeah.
And even though Rubber like, you know, just like does not have an ounce of emotion or like even maybe sincerity to it, like I just wonder if some of like Depew's like motivation in making it was that vulnerability a little bit, even though he like really conceals that as much as possible through like artifice and like comedy and absurdity, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's good stuff. I mean, uh we could we could talk about form and aesthetic. We can move on if you want. I mean, I feel like we're sort of going in circles, which is
Yeah,
very absurd of us.
like a rubber tire almost.
Yeah. No, that's meaning. There's no meaning.
I take it back. You're right.
No, but what I was gonna say was when this movie first started. Nah, I'll save it for my bad. Never mind.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I really loved the cinematography of this film, especially in the beginning. I was captivated by the journey of this tire from birth to figuring out what an insect is or a scorpion, like discovering the world. And I was totally on board.
Yeah,
I loved it.
agreed. The opening is fantastic, and like despite my sort of like personal subjective opinion about the cinematography, like it is very tactile, and I feel like you can almost like reach out and like feel the rubber tread on the tire, and you can like feel the sand beneath it, you know. It does
Yeah.
a fantastic job of like conveying that environment.
And shots of the desert, like there's a moment like the sunset on the valley
Mm.
and the tumbleweeds. I was taken with it. What can I say?
Yeah, so was I, especially at first. Yeah.
At
There-
first.
yeah, in a lot of ways the movie wears out its welcome, and I feel like the sort of like digital cinematography does start to feel a little bit overly like clean and like neat. That's kind of why I
Mm,
prefer film, you know. I prefer that grain and like that like just the way like light is shot on film looks totally different than digitally. So little
yeah.
things like that. But I do agree that the cinematography is very well done, and I love the sort of like sensory aspect of it.
Yeah. And you use the word neat. That made me think about the special effects in this film. The first couple times things explode. It's awesome. I loved it. Uh,
Mhm.
but then like as the movie wore on, the explosions, at least with a lot of the heads, are done digitally, it looked
Mhm.
like. And that just looked clean. It just looked like a digital effect rather than a practical effect.
Yeah, and you're totally right. I actually read that he tried to do practical effects on set while they were shooting the movie, and he wasn't very happy with the way it looked. So then they
Mm,
did do it digitally in post production. And yeah, like it is a little bit disappointing. You want it to be like maybe this sounds kind of crude, but you want it to be like gorier and grosser and
yeah,
like more,
a little
like
bit.
more visceral. Yeah. And I think also it just happens too often. Like within, like I do love the moments where the tire is like first waking up and experiencing the world. And then like within the first couple minutes, it's blowing up a rabbit. And then like pretty much right after that, it blows up a human being. And then that
Yeah,
happens pretty frequently throughout the movie.
yeah.
So like by the like fourth or fifth time that happens, you're like, okay, I've seen this before, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, the tread wore thin.
Nice.
um, I don't really have anything profound to say about the music or editing or any other technical aspects, unless you did.
No, I don't really. Like I think it's a like a well-made movie, but like kind of going back to our conversation before, like with something like this, it can never really be like mind-blowing, I think, you know.
Yeah, just head blowing.
Yeah. That wasn't even intentional. Wow. Puns aplenty tonight.
Um, so do you want to move on to our breakdowns?
Yeah, I think we can.
Okay, cool. You want to go first or should I?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, the good, like I just love the absurdity of it. I think this is a totally unique movie. I think like it is refreshing to see something that like doesn't really care about logic or like an emotional story or like profound themes or anything like that. I'll probably say the inverse of that when we get to the bad portion, but like I do admire the uniqueness of it, you know.
Yeah.
um I think it has a great sense of humor. Like I really love the scene which you alluded to before in the plot synopsis when the kind of like nebbishy accountant character like delivers the poisoned food to the guy in the wheelchair, and then he
Yeah.
ends up eating it himself, which is totally ridiculous, and
I
he
was like,
eats a lot of
what?
it.
What
Yeah.
is happening?
It's a really good absurd joke. I found that really funny. So yeah, really funny movie, very unique, and I admire like what it's trying to do basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I think I love the beginning. I love the beginning even more specifically because the tire is given a personality. It develops very humanizing traits. Like at one point it approaches a puddle of water and you can tell it's the first time this creature has seen water and it doesn't know what to do with it. And then it makes the decision to just jump in because it's thirsty, right? I loved moments like that. I wish the film continued in that vein. But no, I'm on the good, There's a moment, did you notice the first victim of the tire, he's making a phone call in a phone booth.
Hmm.
And to me, it's framed just like in Duel when David
Ooh.
Mann is in the phone booth, because then like behind him in the background comes rolling the tire, which I believe is the exact same shot from Duel with the truck coming through the camera
What
frame.
a yeah, the fantastic point. Absolutely. And like, with this movie being made in 2010, like phone booths were, I don't, if there were any that were still like functioning in the United States, there were probably few and far between, So it is kind of like an anachronism. And maybe it is calling back to that sort of
Yeah.
like, yeah, 70s world.
I'll have to look up those two shots from each respective movie and compare them, because I bet it's an homage to Duel, which is great. Like, didn't
Yeah,
expect that.
that's a great point. Yeah.
um, the bad. What do you think?
Well, I mean, like, yeah, I admire it, but at the same time, again, something like this can only go so far. Like I do, you said it perfectly when you were talking about the, Aristotelian like sort of function of art, form of art to like connect to the human experience. Like I do agree that that's ultimately like that's what I want to get out of art that I either create or experience, so with something like this, I'm like, all right, I love the uniqueness of it. I love that it's like non-mainstream, but it can never really affect you all that much. Like you always sort of like know that it's sort of just like a joke, and there's probably not all that
Hmm.
much like substance to it.
Yeah, which is I think that's a shame, because I feel like that the conceit of this film could have still worked. I just felt like by the third act of the film, when they start like chasing the tire and the whole concoction with the mannequin,
Mhm.
at that point, I got the sense that even Depew was sort of floundering, sort of
Mhm.
grasping at straws himself, like a strong absurdist concept. I feel like still should have continued to the end, but it got a little too messy and uncoiled, I guess, too loose in its construction for me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think especially when the sheriff is in the back of that van with the motorist, the woman, and like they set up like that mannequin, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like where did this come from? How did they even meet? How did this plan come about? I know that's asking for like too much logic from a movie like this, but yeah, at the same time, I think like the point that none of it is supposed to make sense also like is an excuse to not like craft a very like precise story. So that element of it is missing for sure.
Yeah, maybe there could have been a better, maybe a little bit more traditional, conventional filmmaking thrown in, storytelling, I should say, not filmmaking.
Mm.
I don't know, give it some heft.
Yeah, or even like in the opposite direction of even more ridiculous, which I think we see
Yeah,
at the very end with the tricycles sort of storming Hollywood.
yeah.
That movie was not to be, but like it would have been cool if Rubber had gone more in that direction.
I think that's it. I think it played a middle ground and just
Yeah,
lost the impact it could have had either way.
yeah, totally.
Ah, okay, that was awesome. Downright campy. I had one moment. I mean, there were a lot of moments where I legitimately laughed. I was really digging this movie. When the tire, this very anthropomorphized tire, is sitting in an armchair watching NASCAR or Formula One or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, the tire doesn't have a face, and yet I could see it. I could see it very diligently watching this television. This is hilarious.
That's a great joke. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I think also the part where the tire comes across like the big tire fire. Maybe not
Yeah.
campy per se, but like like a good dark joke. Like it's almost
Yeah.
like if yeah, I mean, if it wasn't a tire, then it would be pretty like shocking and depressing to see that. And of
That
course that's the joke. Yeah.
yeah, that was a great moment of emotional heft, I felt like.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe like its origin story or something, even though it had already killed numerous things before that. But um Yeah, I think the scene where like Sheriff Chad, like the alarm goes off that the characters were poisoned, like the audience members.
Hmm.
Um, and then he says that it's all a joke, and like there's another cop who's like, "What are you talking about? Like this person's head just got exploded. Clearly, it's not like a joke or like a movie. Like this is actually happening." And suddenly he's holding like a stuffed alligator under his
Yes,
arm. Um, yeah, that's a funny joke too. That's like definitely the kind of like absurd ridiculous humor that this movie's going for. That whole scene I think is like intentional camp that's really well done, I would say.
agreed. And comedy is hard too. Like we're talking about standing the test of time. We haven't talked about any like outright comedies yet,
Mhm.
but comedy is subjective, and it's you sometimes you either like it or you don't. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, to me it's always seemed like the hardest genre. Like I mean, if you fail at comedy, it's just a complete disaster and nobody laughs, so um
Right.
I would like this kind of is up my comedic alley, so I thought it was pretty successful at that,
Yeah,
but again, that can only go so far.
totally. Are you so you want to give it a rating?
Yeah, I'm ready if you are.
I'm ready. So here on Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Talk, we have 4 ratings. Is it a timeless classic? Does it definitely stand the test of time? Or are there some antiquated moments? It doesn't always hold up, but overall it's great and it stands the test of time. Or it may be historically significant. It may be a lot of fun, but it doesn't really hold up and it doesn't stand the test of time. Or finally, it's not worth revisiting at all. It definitely does not stand the test of time. My estimation of Rubber is that it has a lot of fun moments, but for me, it just can't overcome the its own. It can't overcome its own conceit and its
Mm.
own sort of sandbox, and I don't think it stands the test of time.
Okay. So the lowest ranking is what you're giving it, right?
No, second to lowest.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it may be historically significant or just fun. I
Gotcha.
definitely
Okay.
think this is fun, but as a whole package, it grows a little thin. Wears a little
Got it.
thin.
Cool. I was just clarifying. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I have the same exact verdict. I think it is fun. I think it's maybe not significant, but it is unique. And I admire that it's trying to do something that like the majority of movies are not trying to do. But that is also what limits it. It's not an emotional experience. It's not a well-told story. It's not even really like an aesthetic like masterpiece or anything like that. Although it is, it's well done, but like not much more than that, I would say. So yeah, like I think it should be seen. I think like I'm glad it exists, but I don't think it really excels too much more than that, in my opinion.
All right, there it is, folks. Rubber 2010, directed by Quentin Dupieux. We have given our verdict on this killer car. It's really just part of a car, but I think it counts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, like a dismembered body part of the car that comes alive and goes on a rampage.
yeah. And why limit ourselves to the rules of this box? We create it.
Yeah, as rubber has taught us, it does not have to make sense. You know?
So on that note, let's okay. So just pause for our own sake.
Mhm.
Let's talk about July. Just finish up the Rubber episode, and then we'll
Yeah,
go into Killdozer.
cool. That sounds great.
Okay, great. So the moment maybe you've all been waiting for, patiently, thank you. In July, Kai July, Matt and I have some big news. We are going to G Fest. It is the world's, I don't know if it's the world's largest, but it's a very significant Godzilla Kaiju convention in Chicago in July. We're excited for a live event. We're going to do a live show. We're going to talk to people and just really nerd out about Kaiju. So if you're going to be in the area, come check us out at G Fest. Google it for all the information. In line with G Fest, Matt and I will be featuring 50s and 60s classic kaiju Japanese monster movies on Camp Kaiju. So definitely stick around for that. We don't know exactly what our titles yet are going to be, but we'll let you know on the next episode.
Yeah, we're getting back to some classics a little bit, and I just wanted to say the dates for G Fest. I believe it's July 15th through 17th. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yes, and we will be there on the Saturday.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I can't
Saturday
wait.
afternoon.
July 16th. Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Oh my
Hi,
God.
July.
Yeah, I have no idea what to expect.
Me either. And there's gonna be some mayhem, I'm sure, some monsters, some beasts. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Cool. So thank you again, everybody. Until next time, stay campy. Awesome. So now we're gonna roll into Killdozer, and we're gonna do it all over again. For people who watch
Awesome.
on YouTube, you're getting some real unedited content here. Thanks. Welcome to Camp Kaiju Monster Movie Talk. We're talking about 1974's made-for-TV movie Killdozer, about a killer bulldozer that has been possessed by a supernatural force. Yeah, man.
I would say that Killdozer is one of my favorite portmanteaus. That title is really awesome. Maybe cooler than the movie can actually live up to. I'm just gonna throw that out there right away.
I'm so excited to talk about this movie that I only heard of when I was doing research about killer vehicles. This very subgenre of monster horror films that we love so much. Killdozer, made for TV, made for ABC in 1974, which I believe is the same network that produced Duel 3 years earlier.
Indeed. And the disparity in quality between the two movies, Duel and Killdozer, is quite drastic, I would say.
Couldn't be more night and day. and was ABC thinking they could capture lightning in a bottle twice?
Right.
They didn't.
They did not. Yeah. Not that I'm like extremely well versed in TV movies from the 70s, but I get the sense that Duel was kind of like the anomaly, like the really great, like fantastic made movie that just like happened to be made for TV. I think probably most of the made for TV original ABC movies were closer to Killdozer in quality than Duel. That's my assumption.
I think you're right. Side tangent. Have you ever seen the Stepford Wives?
I have not. No, I want to.
Because I forgot that was a 70s TV movie.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Right? But
Cool.
that's something that is sort of in the pop culture sphere.
Yeah. And there are some made for TV movies that I really like a lot. I'm thinking of there was that Stephen King miniseries Storm of the Century, which came out when I was maybe like, I want to say like 12, maybe 14, something like that. And that's fantastic. So it can definitely be done, but it takes a certain skill set, I think,
Yes. Do you know I think the TV movie Beast about the killer giant squid?
Whoa, no.
Yeah, it's from the
Sounds
90s.
awesome.
It's based on a Peter Benchley novel called The Beast. It's essentially Jaws, but with a giant squid. But that was a movie that came out when I was a kid that's just like permanently lodged in my my subconscious.
Wow, I really hope we talk about that on Camp Kaiju at some point.
I would love to.
Cool. So made for TV movies can be great, but maybe not Killdozer.
Well, Killdozer has a lot of fun things going for it.
Yeah.
I don't know if we necessarily have to go into like a detailed plot summary, but there is essentially a group of construction workers on an island, and they are working on an runway or something like that. They're doing something construction-y, and they uncover a space rock that, in like a very quick pre-credits prologue, is shown plummeting to Earth from some unknown place in the cosmos. Well, it turns out that this space rock is inhabited by some sort of force that then possesses the bulldozer that unearths it. So then crazy things happen with this bulldozer that's operating on its own and killing people just like intently, with intent. So then at the end, it climaxes after like most of the construction crew has died. There's like a couple people left, and they lure the Killdozer onto like an electrified mat, and then crank up the voltage, and then release the malevolent force out of the bulldozer. And then the end credits roll.
That's basically it. Yeah. I mean, like they kind of try to like give the men some like distinct personalities, sort of like the foreman Kelly is like a recovering alcoholic. This is supposed to be his last job. So it's kind of like the on the verge of retirement sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
There's another character whose name I honestly can't remember, sorry, but he kind of like when like when the first person dies, when the bulldozer kind of like claims its first victim, there's another character who kind of goes off the deep end a little bit. Like he kind of just like goes on these long like ranting monologues about like how good of friends they were. So like the movie tries to like give them some personality, but it doesn't really work all that well.
Yeah, I do think they work well with each other though.
Mhm.
I didn't have any problem with the performances. And I like the concept actually. It's based, I did not know this. I did not know that there was actual literary cred with Killdozer. It's based on a 1944 novella originally published in Astounding magazine by a science fiction writer named Theodore Sturgeon, I believe. This was his only like claim to fame was Killdozer. But 30 years later, it was made into a movie.
I'm intrigued to read the short story. I feel like maybe this kind of thing could work better as a short story than as a film. Although like Duel kind of had a similar origin, like a short story, although by Richard Matheson. And yeah, so I don't know if like what kind of comparison and quality the short stories have, but I would like to read it for sure.
Yeah. I think where Killdozer. Oh, first of all, I also want to mention that it was directed by Jerry London, who, if you don't know, very well-regarded TV director. He directed a lot of television movies, like Emmy Award-winning stuff. He directed the 9-hour miniseries called Shogun, based on the popular novel, which I've heard of and I knew is like this epic classic. So there's a cool connection. Not everyone associated with Killdozer was, necessarily past their prime or whatever. But it's not Duel, and I do think it's fair to compare it to Duel based on the TV movie from the same studio about a killer vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And where this movie fails for me is in the direction. It's just not shot interestingly, like dynamically.
Yeah.
There's a lot of just very staid shots of a
Yeah.
rampaging bulldozer.
Absolutely. To the point where like you sometimes don't even know exactly what's going on. Like there's one character, actually I think it's the same guy I was talking about before, who yeah, so he's like he's kind of going off the deep end. Like I said, he's like getting a little drunk and he's driving a Jeep and he's playing chicken with the bulldozer, and like suddenly he's dead and you don't really know exactly what happened. And like the moment when the bulldozer like seems to run over the car, like that takes place like on the other side of like a hill or a sand dune or something. And I feel like that actually describes every single murder in this movie, where like you think you know what's happening, there's like a really obscure and like vague unclear shot, and suddenly somebody's dead. Like that
Yeah.
happens all like over and over again in this movie.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, the director, the crew, they're clearly compensating for their lack of budget in a way. Like they can't actually show somebody getting destroyed by a bulldozer
Yeah.
with, their limits. So they would hide those moments, which is fair, but still not done the way maybe Spielberg would have done it.
Yeah, to put it mildly, yeah. Like you could at least have, you could build up some suspense. Like pretty early on there's a part where I think it's Dennis, the character of Dennis, he like is standing in front of the bulldozer and like it's moving behind him, and like suddenly like the actual shovel part of the bulldozer like slams like right behind him.
Yeah.
And that should be like a really cool, visceral, suspenseful scene, but it's not. I mean, like you said, it's all like shot from one perspective basically, and like
Yeah.
suddenly there's the sound effect and we don't even really know what's going on. Like
Right.
scenes like that in capable hands could have been pretty effective.
Yeah. I like these sorry. These are the types of B movies that I would that I would love to see done with like a real proper Hollywood budget and an imaginative director behind the lens.
Yeah.
I'd love to see Killdozer remade with like Tom Cruise in the role. I don't know.
Yeah. Or even, like maybe even sort of like past their prime, former like action stars or something like that, like Steven Seagal or something in like a
Yeah.
remake of Killdozer. I would watch that.
Or Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
It would be cheesy, but in like a really effective way, I feel like.
Yeah, intentionally cheesy. Yeah. Whereas
Yeah.
this, I think, is kind of just like boringly cheesy.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't run very long, which is nice.
Yeah.
I watched it by myself. I would prefer to watch something like this with a group of people.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I agree with you
So,
there. Yeah.
yeah. There was something else I was going to say. Killdozer. Great name. Did you know that there was a real life Killdozer?
Yeah. In Colorado, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really know exactly what happened. There's a documentary about that though.
Yeah.
Which
So
I would love
this
to watch.
guy, he had grievances with the local government and institutions like the police and fire department and stuff. Anyways, he spent like 9 months putting steel and concrete plating on a bulldozer of his. And when he was ready, he got inside and went out on a rampage in this small Colorado town, destroyed countless buildings because the police, SWAT teams, they couldn't do anything to stop him. Nobody died, fortunately, except the driver of the bulldozer did kill himself. It was sort of one of those missions for him. But yeah, kind of like a crazy thought that supernatural stuff aside, yeah, bulldozer can do real damage.
Yeah. That's a tragic. I wouldn't say life imitates art because for a lot of different reasons, but yeah, it's a tragic story. And um maybe I think that story is more interesting, sadly, than like what we see in the movie Killdozer, because like like the evil entity that sort of like possesses the bulldozer is just some weird kind of like alien force that comes to Earth on like a meteor.
Yeah.
And like I'm not saying you have to like over explain the alien or like where it comes from or anything like that, but just the fact that it's like, oh, a meteor crash lands and suddenly the bulldozer is possessed is like pretty lame. Like pretty overly simplistic, I would say.
It does remind me of Rubber, though, because there is no explanation for the tire coming to life.
That's true. And I almost prefer there to be no explanation than just like the laziest possible explanation. Yeah.
Right. Maybe the bulldozer just comes to life.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah. I don't need the alien, but if you are going to give me an alien, make it an interesting alien.
Yeah. And I will say that my favorite part of the movie is the first 90 seconds. Like you have the great old Universal logo, my favorite studio logo of all time from like the 70s and 80s. And then you have these like handmade special effects of like the meteor sort of like crashing down towards Earth. For the first minute, I was like, oh, cool. Like I feel like this is gonna be awesome. And then it just gets so boring and repetitive from there. So and before you said that you would like to watch it with like an audience of people who's all like having fun at the same time or whatever.
Yeah.
And I certainly would love to do that as well. But it's hard to imagine this being like fun and entertaining, even if you're in a room with people who are like drinking or having fun or whatever, it's like, man, this would be boring regardless.
There are some, yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. I was really in it to win it for the first half of the film. By the second half, I was just kind of on my phone with it on in the background.
My attention was definitely wandering a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of a bummer. Yeah.
It could have been more though, because like the group of people stranded on an island reminded me of the setup for The Thing, where you had a group of people stranded on this, for all intents and purposes, an island combating an alien life force.
Yeah. Like The Thing is like the best example of all time at that kind of story, and it's an effective plot structure for sure. Like confined space, like just like increasing paranoia. I love that setup, but this movie does not do a very good job of manifesting that.
No, it did not. You want to do a good, bad, and campy?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. What did you like about this? I will challenge you.
It for me, I think it's the first 90 seconds.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I like the special effects in the start there. There's kind of a cool like blue light in the bulldozer sometimes. I liked that special effect, which like represents the alien life force or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, that's about it for me, I think.
I I think I like the story a lot. It's something that is really simple to latch onto. Yeah, I think I like the script. I like the story.
Mhm.
Even if it wasn't done, even if it wasn't handled as capably as it could have been.
Yeah. Yeah, I like great concept, great premise, but they do not capitalize on it. Yeah, but I agree with
No,
you.
the bad. There's. I mean, obviously we ripped this one, but I did have. I mean, there's just some specifics I can pull out, and I want to find one real quick.
Yeah.
Killdozer. Oh, the cliche convention of people being killed because they are like stumbling and tripping over everything, which is such a horror movie cliche. Or they don't move at all. They just stand there and scream, I guess seemingly paralyzed with fear, but then they just get killed. And you're just screaming at them like, run, but
Right,
don't trip
yeah.
over anything when you run.
Yeah, but I feel like that kind of had to happen in this movie because like a relatively fast human being could outrun a bulldozer. Like,
Right.
there's not much of a threat if these people were actually like capable and like able to like move like a normal human being.
Right.
Which
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The premise is great, but that's like the underlying sort of like flaw of it. Like a bulldozer is like a cool big machine, but like it shouldn't really be all that threatening if you're like outside of the machine and can like get away from it pretty easily, which hypothetically they should be able to.
Yes, I haven't seen a lot of zombie movies,
Hmm.
but I want to ask, with the slow moving zombies, how do people fall victim?
I think it's mostly surprise, like a zombie suddenly like reaches through the door and like tears off your flesh or whatever. Like
Mhm.
a zombie could sneak up on you, but I don't think a bulldozer could ever sneak up on you.
Ah, yes, there lies the inherent flaw of the bulldozer.
There are some funny moments where the bulldozer is sort of like peeking around a corner almost, like we barely see it over like the rise of a hill. And
Yeah,
that's kind of fun. I would put that in the good and probably also the campy category. Like,
yeah,
if the movie had embraced like that sort of ridiculousness, then I probably would have liked it more.
exactly. So maybe it took itself a little too seriously at times.
Yeah. I don't even know like what tone it's going for. Like it's because it's not ridiculous, but also it's like um I guess it just doesn't really have like the skill to like really kind of like take its character seriously or like really like examine this predicament. So I kind of
Right, right.
yeah.
Yeah, like make it a character drama at the very least.
Yeah.
But it didn't even, it wasn't interested in exploring the deep, psychoanalysis of these human characters either.
Right.
So
Yeah. And I think like if you maybe talked a little bit, if the movie talked a little bit more about like the construction company or like what they're doing there to like it's kind of just like in an unnamed African country. We don't really know exactly where they are.
yeah,
So it could have had some more like maybe like political commentary or themes about just like how like man is sort of like devastating the earth and like using up its natural resources.
yeah.
But clearly it's not interested in doing that either. So it
What a
kind of
shame.
yeah, it doesn't really do any of those things. Yeah.
um, my one campy thought, I mean, there were a lot, but I picked, there's a moment, there's like a climactic fight, a duel, if you will, between the bulldozer and this other big rig with like it's like a crane,
Yeah.
and they square off. And I was getting really real BattleBot vibes with it.
Yeah.
That made me laugh.
That part is pretty cool. Again, it could have been way more exciting than it actually is in the movie, but it's a
Right,
cool idea at least.
right.
Yeah.
So for those of you keeping score at home, we have 4 categories that we like to rate our monster movies on. Number 1, It's a timeless classic. It definitely stands the test of time. Number 2, it has some antiquated moments, but ultimately it's really good and stands the test of time. 3, it's historically significant. It may be a lot of fun, but all together, it does not stand the test of time. Or the 4th option we have is there are no redeeming qualities and it does not stand the test of time. Matt, where would you put Killdozer in your list of favorite movies?
Oh my God. Number 4,000 approximately. No, I'm sorry to say that this is the first movie that I will give it is not worth revisiting. It definitely does not stand the test of time ranking too. It has an awesome title, a great first minute, and almost nothing else good about it, I would say.
I can't disagree with that. I, however, think that it has enough fun moments, as few and far between as they are, to warrant at least one watching. So I don't think it stands the test of time. But this is what's interesting about cult films, because this is a cult film. It's worth checking out, but no, I would not recommend this to people as like a must-see movie.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Like I think just for its premise, it is, like, to say that you saw the movie called Killdozer, I think maybe it's worth a watch. Yeah.
All right.
Badge of honor.
Badge of honor. We've earned it. Thank you, everybody. This concludes our killer road trip monster movie experience. And we want to thank you for joining us on the road. Join us next month for Kaiju July. We'll be at G-Fest in person, but of course, right here on the podcast or on YouTube if you're watching there. Thank you for your support. Matt, this has been a lot of fun.
Indeed. Thanks, Vincent.
All right. Take care, everybody. See you, Matt.
See you.